It's a new year, so it's time for a new format for last week at the table. On Thursday night, we had character creation for a new D&D Essentials game. 6 intrepid players rolled up characters to begin playing through the Dragon of Icespire Keep. We will play every Thursday night at 8 p.m. on my Twitch channel. In the history of D&D, this week our heroes were joined by some new faces. Accio was back, reprising his role as Omu the fighter, who's now been converted from a pre-generated character to a new full party member. And Wesley joined us playing an elf named Sylvia. Seems like they both had fun, so hopefully they will both become full-time players in the game. Now Devlin, when the party began questioning the make that the 4 people who were being aged in the ogre's pantry and freed them, Devlin's goal was, of course, to see how this could be put to the party's financial advantage. The 2 human merchants indicated they are from Hosland, and they said that when they get back to their home base, they will be sure that a substantial reward is sent to the party in Dedale for their rescue. They and the gnome are extremely weak and only want to get away and get back to town. Now Siren, of course, he was anxious to continue the exploration of the basement level of the keep. He wants to be sure that they find everything that could be a danger to them once they are able to secure the deed to the place. He found a secret door that led to a small choked-off stairway that leads back up to the upper level. They'll have to spend some time clearing that out if they want to know exactly what is there and what they will have to deal with. Now, Omu reminded everyone of the glittering that he had seen in the ogre's nest. When they investigated, they eventually found an elven cloak, and this is a cloak that nearly makes the wearer invisible, and a chest. After Devlin carefully examined the chest and determined there were no traps, he opened it, and inside they found a few brass candlesticks, not worth very much, a few gold coins, a handful of silver coins, and several hundred copper pieces. There's also some glass beads. There was some question about how sturdy those glass beads were. Eventually they realized that they were no good to be used, say, as ball bearings, but Devlin did have an idea how they might be put to use, and he worked on that through the episode. Sylvia found her gear in a pile in the ogre's lair, and she quickly re-equipped. She was very interested in joining the adventurers. The men-at-arms from Dedale were very concerned about the merchants and the gnome that they had freed. The captain, Aethert, suggested that 3 of the guards return to Dedale with the merchants and the gnome, and the 2 other guards will stay with the adventurers while they finish exploring the rest of the moat house, basement and sub-basement level. Now, Siren, when they had all made those tactical arrangements and the 3 guards had left, Siren led the group back to the torture chamber and clambered down the ladder, followed shortly by the others. At the end of the tunnel below, he found a secret door that led into some crypts that smelled of death. The rest of the group soon followed. As they moved into the crypt, they encountered 4 ghouls. The party fought the ghouls and destroyed them. They found no treasure in the crypt, but there were two ways out, one through an actual finished hallway leading to the east, and the other through the back of one of the crypts heading south. With a little investigation, they found the ghoul's nest through the back of the crypt to the south, and they found something quite ironic. In the treasure pile, not only did they find eventually several hundred more gold and silver coins, but they also found a scroll of protection from undead, a potion of control undead, and 7 vials of holy water. Quite ironic that ghouls would have all of that stuff that's good against undead. Now, Sylvia and Siren spent a couple of hours exploring the warrens of twisting tunnels beyond the crypt. Eventually, everyone was tired and they needed a night's rest. So they climbed back up to the surface level and they made their camp, ironically, in the same area where the bandits had been living for some time and where they found one of the chests up above. They set watches, and even though one of the guards that stayed with them fell asleep during his shift, nothing came to eat them during the night. Then they went back down and continued exploring the next day. In the morning, they went beyond the crypt in the worked tunnel that led off to the east. This led to several more branches, and exploring one way, they came to a chamber behind a door. And beyond the door, they encountered a group of gnolls. Now, the gnolls were suspicious of the adventurers until Devlin and Omu stepped forward with their cloaks that have been emblazoned with the symbol of Bargle. And they sealed their friendship with the gnolls when, of all things, Siren began to speak to the gnolls in their own language. So through Siren and through other conversations with the gnolls, once they had gained a little bit of trust from them, they learned that there are soldiers down on this level in a direction that they have not explored before, and that the gnolls are not terribly happy with them. The soldiers are abusive and stingy with gold, and they also had been employing the gnolls to try to keep the ghouls from attacking the soldiers. And basically, that was by um, giving the gnolls meat that the gnolls were supposed to give then to the ghouls and keep the ghouls from coming in to attack either the gnolls or go beyond them and attack the soldiers. And then the gnolls basically would have to fend for themselves. And as the episode ended, the gnolls seemed to indicate they would be willing to help the PCs drive off the soldiers, who are part of a force that Bargle is assembling, and the gnolls call that preparations for an invasion. On Sunday, in the Walker of Waterdeep campaign, the heroes spent their second full day in Chult. They visited the markets, they learned some more information pertinent to their quest, and some locals attempted to swindle both Galabar and Xandri. Now, Adamant bookended the episode. He started by returning the repaired hammer that the albino dwarven artisan Throry had given him. Adamant invited Barak Clanghammer to come along, and the dwarf did. And he caught up with Rory after making a playful entrance to enchant and surprise his old friend. Since the rest of the party already knows Barak's polymorphing trick, he polymorphed himself into a golden dragonfly who perched on first on Adamant's shoulder and then flew over and perched on Throry's shoulder. and then uh, announced himself as Throri's old friend and leaped off onto a stool and transformed back into his dwarven visage. And of course, they went on like dwarves, and the party decided, okay, we'll be here all day. So they went on about their business after that. Galabar looked for a saddle of the cavalier. Now he eventually found a merchant named Sana who can procure one at the jewel market, and she told him to be sure to let her know if he wants a saddle of the cavalier for a four-legged mount or a two-legged mount. The This was one of those times where kind of had the rules as written versus uh, sort of table rule issue. And what I decided would make the most sense as the DM in the game is that you need two different kinds of saddles if you have a two-legged mount and a four-legged mount. Now, of course, eventually the merchant teased out of Galabar that he wants the mount for a dinosaur, and he actually didn't know whether he was going to be able to find himself a two-legged dinosaur or a four-legged dinosaur. And so the merchant said, well, you need to come back and let me know whether it's a two-legged mount or a four-legged mount, because the structure of the saddles is so different that even though a saddle of the cavalier can adapt to fit any kind of four-legged uh, mount. You know, you buy one, you can put it on a horse, you can take that same one, throw it on a griffin, take that same one, throw it on a four-legged dinosaur, and the magic in the saddle will sort of adapt to fit whatever four-legged mount it is. But because of the way the design of the saddle has to be different if it's on a two-legged mount that is standing more vertical, and you have to completely sit in it a different way. I said those would have to be two different designs of Saddle of the Cavalier, and that one would not be able to transform to fit the other type of creature. You know, the the DMG, it just simply says works on any mount. I'm gonna just say it'll work on any four-legged mount, and then the other one will work on any two-legged mount. So I just want to make it a little bit more specialized because it just doesn't make sense to me that a saddle for a four-legged mount would work on a two-legged mount. And Oyahusa wound up buying a moon-touch short sword from a weaponsmith named Mezoar. He also looked for bracers of defense and found them at a stall called the Shadow Dancer's Shield, which is run by a merchant named Quarian Urthandar. But he realized that the Chultan market, especially this particular Chultan market, was quite steep. The jewel market is the most expensive place in Port Nyanzaru. And essentially going there to buy a magic item that is relatively easy to find, like bracers of defense. It's just it's a rare item, but it's not like a super rare item. You could go to a city like Waterdeep and find those fairly easily. You come to Port Nyanzaru, and it's like ordering a glass of water at a restaurant like the Capitol Grill or Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. You know, you go into most places, you order a glass of water or a bottle of water, and they may just throw it in for free, or it might be $1. You go to some really fancy, high-priced steakhouse, and you order that, and it's probably going to be like $8 for for the water. So that's essentially what the jewel market is in Port Nyanzaru. You go there and you're going to pay a whole lot more. And he realized that the price they wanted for the Bracers' defense was quite a bit more expensive than he could have gotten them in Waterdeep. So he just passed on that. Now, our player who plays Thardrum, he had let us know earlier that he was going to be delayed, and in fact, the delay turned out to be longer than he expected, and so he was unable to attend most of the session. He just kind of got in the last half hour or so, and didn't have a whole lot to do, unfortunately, in the session. Now, Zandri overheard a man named Weshtek in the street talking about escaping from the Githyanki. Zandri overheard a man named Weshtek in the street talk about escaping from the Githyanki. Together with Adamant, she was able to tease the story out of Weshtek about being selected by the Githyanki after a painful interrogation process and taken for an assignment that led them out into the jungle. Now, Weshtek was one of those mercenary sellswords that was stolen by the Githyanki from Jobal. Basically, they forced him to write up a contract using their psionic mind control, if you will, and left him with no memory of having done that. The interrogation process that they used to select which of the sellswords they were going to take with them was of a similar psionic invasive nature, and it also was uncomfortable for them. And while they initially promised that those who were mercenaries would be able to retire, and those who were slaves would never have to be slaves in Port Nyanzaru again, that was a bit of a misleading, while technically accurate, promise. It was technically accurate because the Githyanki never intended for those individuals to ever get back to Port Nyanzaru, and it was misleading because they had basically hired them as disposable labor, and if they did not get killed in the mission in the jungle that they were bringing them for, then they were going to be enslaved to the Githyanki Empire. So after a few days of trekking into the jungle, Weshtek and several others understood that they were never going to be allowed to return, and they tried to make their escape. Weshtek knows of no others who made it back to Port Nyanzaru, and he saw at least one other escapee be hacked down by the silver greatsword of one of the Githyanki warriors. Now, this time we learned a little bit more about Chenler, in the fact that while he's been here in Port Nyanzaru, Chenler has been spending most of his days at Akini Afa's estate, sitting in the sunroom with Barak and simply talking about philosophy, military strategy, various different esoteric things they have each seen and done, and just sort of bonding like a couple of old war heroes swapping stories. And Barak, as we've already stated, he surprised his old friend Throry early in the episode, and then he surprised some unwelcome intruders to Akini Afa's house at the end of the episode. Now, the party met a number of NPCs along the way who amused, delighted, tried to swindle, and distracted them. More about some of those later. We've already talked about some of them. More about the others a little bit later. Adamant went to the miners' exchange, and he talked to a dwarf named Davgion Diamond Death. He told them some information. He told the party some information about two rare minerals that were known to have come from Rakamar before exports from there dried up many years ago. Those metals are yogrolium and caspalt. And essentially, yogrolium can be alloyed with other metals and can help to focus or channel certain types of arcane energies. So uh, you can use it in one way and it'll channel arcane fire energy. Use it another way, it will focus arcane or channel arcane lightning energy. Do it another way, it would be radiant energy. Another way, it would be cold energy, so on and so forth. And caspalt is a metal that is very brittle on its own, but when you alloy it with other metals, it can increase their hardness. So you could, for instance, make an alloy of caspalt and gold, and the gold would be just as rigid as a plate of adamantine of the same thickness. Now, of course, with gold, that's impractical because gold is so heavy. So you probably wouldn't want to use it for on gold if you're going to make something like a weapon or armor, but you could make it out of another metal that maybe is lighter but then give it a great deal of rigidity. Now, you also have to have uh, a metal in the alloy that will give it strength because, like I said, uh, the caspalt on its own is quite brittle. So if you can combine uh, a strong but malleable metal along with caspalt, you can get a very strong and very hard metal. Now, Galabar went to try to buy a dinosaur from a merchant named Vir, Vershepa, and she informed him that if he wanted to take a dinosaur back to Waterdeep, he would need the proper licenses. According to her, the Code Legal of Waterdeep requires all owners of exotic animals to have licenses and pay fees. Now, Galabar had never heard of this, and neither had Oyahusa. But due to some very poor uh, insight checks, that to be able to tell whether or not this merchant was telling them the truth, uh, they couldn't be sure whether she was being dishonest or not. It certainly sounds like something that the bureaucrats in Waterdeep would dream up, especially if there had ever been any kind of problems with somebody bringing exotic animals into the city before. After he left the dinosaur market, Galabar and the rest of the party ran into a pair of tabaxi who had a broken down wagon being pulled by a juvenile hadrosaur. And they gave the party this sob story about how they were on their way to the docks. Uh, they had sold the last of their poor departed uh, father's estate, and they were going to leave Port Nyanzaru forever. And on their way to sell their beloved pet hadrosaur, the wagon had broken down and they were trying to set it up to try to sell the hadrosaur to Galabar because they had kind of seen that he was out looking for a dinosaur. Well, it turns out after Oriahusa did a bit of an insight check on them and this time got a very good result, he realized that these two were trying to swindle the uh, the poor gullible barbarian, and about the time he recognized that, he named drop Akini Afa, and that started to make them very, very anxious. And he also, about that time, uh, the owner of the hadrosaur began calling it out by name and whistling for it, and the animal immediately perked up, hearing the sound of a familiar voice, and just started trundling off in that direction, pulling the cart with it. After the party had fixed the supposedly broken wheel that had fallen off. Uh, Really, they had just loosened a fastener that allowed the wheel to slip off and make the cart look like it was broken down. So then they all went back to Akiniafa's estate, where they were going to have their third and final meal with one of the other trade princes. And this one was Queothi. At the meal, Xandri drew a lot of attention from trade prince Queothi's female body servant, Ixis. Ixis is just the ideal of a lovely uh, late teen, early 20s Chilton woman. And Ixis made some very obvious and very forward romantic advances towards Xandri, and Xandri was reciprocating. Eventually, Xandri suggested that she and Ixis take a moonlight stroll over to the Temple of Sune, uh, where Xandri knew that they could find uh, some private rooms to explore the wonders uh, of romance together. However, that most unexpectedly killed the ardor of the servant. And when Xandri suggested again that they go to the Temple of Sune, the servant actually tried to cast a spell to charm Xandri into simply retiring to her chambers together here at the home of Akiniafa. The charm did not work, and Xandri used the party's code word of red, meaning there's something dangerous, and it immediately got the attention of Adamant, Oyahusa, and Barak. The dwarf, who we all found out last week, or everybody in the party realized last week, is actually a polymorphed gold dragon, used his frightful presence against the two body servants. They fled, and as they exited the door, they tried to fly away by turning into their true form, which is an incubus and a succubus. Well, Adamant, being the cleric, he immediately cast Hold Person, and it landed, and he was able to stop both of them from fleeing. Now, uh, Queothi, unlike the other two trade princes, she actually seemed to have been rather fond of the Githyanki, and she expressed rather obvious mock dismay when she was told that they had attacked Waterdeep, because in her words she had found the Githyanki so pleasant she couldn't imagine that they would do something so horrible. But shortly thereafter her two body servants were revealed to be fiends from the lower planes, and when Queothi was confronted about this, she pulled a poison weapon on the party to try to defend herself. And that's exactly when we ran out of time for the session. So we're going to pick it up there next week. So we left on something of a cliffhanger on that episode. And as I said, with the history of D&D, we left it where there's maybe, possibly a temporary, well, at least there's not hostilities with the gnolls, but there's potentially a temporary alliance with the gnolls against some of the soldiers because they don't like the way that they are being treated by uh, the soldiers that Bargle has hired. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for this week. Thank you for listening. Good night.